GenAI has become one of the most powerful water cooler conversations. So you can hear about it in the corner of the office, in any bar. But the real question is, why is GenAI creating such a buzz? It is difficult to understand all the expectations that are super high and maybe somehow higher than what it is in reality. In this conversation, we want to have a clear understanding about the key differences that we have between GenAI and AI in the broader landscape. We want to understand which industries and functions are ripe and ready for this GenAI disruption. We want to understand also how to overcome the adoption hurdles and to benefit from some real cool success stories, especially in non-tech companies who are today leveraging in GenAI for the growth and innovation. Lastly, I would like to tell you that one of the key topics that we will be discussing is about how to approach GenAI adoption strategically and how do we manage the change that it brings in organizations. And my experts today are one of the most recognized people in terms of innovation and technology. One of them is Zuleka Kaysan, who is the managing director of the Cornerstone Advisory, which is an innovation and operational performance consultancy. And the other one is Florian Raemy, who is the CEO of Prométhée, the AI-first Swiss consultancy. Zuleka, I want to start with you. So what are you up to today in your company?
Okay, so if anyone that knows the Cornerstone Advisory knows that we help organizations build their innovation strategies and their innovation capabilities. A lot of my clients at the moment are throughout the region in the Middle East, work with semi-government and government developers, predominantly in the construction development space, and helping them really maximize those opportunities around technologies. So some of the cool projects we're looking at are around smart cities, and now what we're calling conscious cities as well.
That's super cool. And I think this smart city story has become quite popular, especially because of the South Division that they have in terms of reconstruction of the full nation, right?
Absolutely. What we're seeing is it's being driven by governments as well, but peers are really driving investment in smart city technologies and technologies generally. We're seeing insane investment levels across the region. We're still yet to see the ROI on this, but some of the creative things that are happening behind the scenes are very, very interesting.
Thank you, Zuleka. Florian Raemy. In fact, I just have to open a parenthesis here. I have known Florian for approximately more than 25 years, in fact, because we were peers in the same university. And it was already clear that this guy was going to go that far in terms of knowledge of technology, in terms of approach. He was already Mr. Good in tech. Florian, tell me a little bit more about what do you do in Prométhée?
Prométhée is a Swiss company, and we are specialized only on generative AI. So we started the company a bit more than a year ago when GenAI came. We saw that as a real opportunity for transformation for companies. And in fact, we spend our time in the company in doing first the strategy, supporting our client to think about where the opportunities are and what should the strategy be in terms of really realizing these gains. The second thing we do that goes with is all what is linked to change management, trainings, and support. And most of our activities today is in terms of development of solution for our clients.
I was mentioning before this story about this water cooler conversation, and we hear stories that goes from one side to the other, and it's difficult to understand what is a myth and a reality in terms of the GenAI performance, about how to implement it. And I think it is a good moment to just to give a little bit of framework about that. And I wanted to understand, why is GenAI so impactful according to you? How do you think are companies or people understanding or misunderstanding GenAI?
I'm happy to dive in first with a definition of AI and Gen AI, because as you say, it's quite confusing. We think of AI, we think of ChatGPT and full stop. So from an AI perspective, it's more like teaching computers, it's a broader perspective. So it's teaching computers to think and extract information like we would as humans. So, you think about your read.ai that does a transcript and summarizes your meeting, or think about voice assistants or chatbots that interact with customers. They've got very defined parameters. Generative AI is a more specialized, nuanced element of AI. So instead of just extracting information, synthesizing it, it actually is more about creativity. So this is where your DALL-E and your image creation and your music composition and all the creative stuff comes in. You feed it some prompts and it generates something completely new. So in short, I would say that AI helps computers think and extract. And then Gen AI takes it a step further by helping users to create.
From your side, Florian, what have you observed?
So it's really a good question, because it's the foundation of our company and all the vision we see and we discuss with our clients. In fact, for us, what is really disruptive with Gen AI is the fact that Gen AI has three capabilities. The first one is the one that has been mentioned by Zuleka. It's a creativity. So last year, it was long discussion with academic experts whether algorithm, because at the end of the day, Gen AI is algorithm, could be creative. But when you look at the results, in fact, Gen AI is creative, right? When you do a poem, you create an image or whatever. It's something that is not existing already, okay? So it's really a creation, so to say. And that's really something new that was not existing before with AI before. And that's a capability that is just incredible in terms of creativity. The second one is really the fact that when we talk about IT in the past, when we talk about traditional AI, like deep learning, we talk about data and we talk about structured data. I mean, an IT system just works with structured data. You have an input, you have an output, you will have an algorithm in the middle, but it's always something structured that goes from one side to the other side in terms of output. Gen AI is not that. Gen AI is dealing with unstructured data. It can read a document. It can interpret an image. And it's that capability that really changed the way we are going to live in the world of tomorrow, out of speaking, out of writing elements with creativity. But that the fact that we talk about unstructured data, within a company, you have a lot of unstructured data. Most of the white-collar jobs are linked to unstructured data, documents, information. And that's really what is interesting with Gen AI, is that capability to deal with unstructured data. And the third element is linked to the capability which is intrinsic to Gen AI. Today, for example, ChatGPT has an IQ based on the studies of 147. I mean, if you have I would love to have an assistant next to me seated with an IQ of 147. I mean, it will really help me in doing my job. And in fact, it's what ChatGPT is when you use it correctly. It's really someone that speaks more than 90 languages and that is able to make reasoning, make analysis, and support you in most of your daily tasks. And these three elements are, for me, what create that disruption and enable a real impact on the business.
So, in fact, we are getting closer and closer to how the brain processes information, because the brain processes information is not only about actually being just an encyclopedia or collecting knowledge, but it is the ability to do extrapolate information, create, like in our brain, neural pathways that allow us to, through experience, to recognize more than patterns, ways in order to structure information that is unstructured. Is that correct, Florian?
Yes, totally, yeah. That's very good.
Now, coming back to the myth that there is in all these conversations, chit chats about AI, I wanted to understand a little bit more about in the reality. What is the rate of adoption of Gen AI within corporations? Within corporates, is there any specific trend, specific industry where the adoption is better? How is it happening today?
If you look at the market, and I will also be able to give you some of the discussion I have with some prospect or clients. First, you should remind that the technology is a bit older than 18 months, right? So it's short in a full life cycle of a new technology. And the adoption rate diverge from one place to the other. As a McKinsey study said that last year, around 23% of companies had tried already some proof of concept or implemented GenAI in some processes. The last study from McKinsey for 24, we are at 71%. So the adoption is slowly coming, and the speed is increasing. That's good. It's also what we see on the market. And some clients we had discussion with last year are now jumping in, saying, "Okay, I do understand, and I think it's valuable to do it." What we see also is there is differences in terms of market. Now, the highest level of adoption is on the side of Asia Pacific. Of course, China too, but then it's more emerging market and particularly Middle East, where the level of adoption is high, and it's higher than US. And the last one, of course, is Europe, and it's linked somehow to a few elements that, of course, we will discuss later also with Zuleka. On one side is really that level of first trust, fear, and expectation. And that's something more cultural. It comes from different countries, and the perception is different depending on where you are. The highest level of expectation and trust is India, and the lowest is some European countries. I won't name them. So that's pretty interesting. The other element that goes with is the link also to the perception of urgency in adopting GenAI. The level of competitiveness and pressure that comes in these markets are much higher than the one we might have in Europe, or if I talk about Switzerland, particularly Switzerland. I mean, the business has been run for years and years, and then why should we change, right? What's the pain that should push us to change? And that's also something that is pretty much cultural, that hinder adoption for many companies. And it's linked to somehow the culture and not really the fact that it's valuable or not. Most of the discussion I have with C-level today, especially mostly in Switzerland, so to say, everybody is questioning the what, the how, and the when, right? And most of the people are persuaded that they will have to jump one day, right? The question is when and how, for doing what. And some companies are slower than others to make such decision, knowing that they already have a strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. They already have IT plans for these periods, and they also need to make changes then, also in all the forecasting and planning they have. And that's today also a barrier for adoption linked just to operating a company. So that's what I can say about the adoption, how I see it today on the market.
I think we will have the opportunity to discuss a little bit deeper about this how, because this is in the head of many of us, how to start. I was a little bit like impressed or amazed by the number that you gave, the 71% from McKinsey saying that they have started already using AI. Are we talking about using like ChatGPT to rewrite an email, or are we talking really for something more than just reworking some text?
It can be broad because typically using ChatGPT for doing prompt, super prompts, typically you make programming of prompt for doing specific tasks, but just using ChatGPT will count somehow. So it doesn't mean that the level of investment for doing proof of concept based on the cloud with higher investment has been done. But it's more the fact that they started. Okay, so they started experimenting, they started to take teams and do a certain number of things, right? And touching the processes. But the question of the tool and the how is not really clear in the study. It's because it's statistics, right? So you don't know when the person answers whether it's something big or something small.
Yeah. What also another interesting fact is that you were mentioning that Middle East has an extreme appetite. I mean, Middle East and some developing countries, they have high expectations on artificial intelligence. Zuleka, what can you tell us about how is that different? Why is it different already in the Middle East?
I don't know if you remember, Ivan, a few years ago on a podcast, we were talking about technology just being an absolute buzzword, everyone's saying it. Now what we're actually seeing is organizations are really putting their money where their mouth is. So there's a lot of investment in AI and GenAI. So just going back to statistics again, I have a separate set of statistics from BCG that say that 64% of companies here in the region already investing in GenAI, and 34% are planning to. Now, again, like Florian said, I don't know the extent to this, but what I can see through my clients is that there is heavy investment in the more aspirational elements of GenAI. So they've gone from, rather than summarizing emails, they've gone straight for the big bang and seeing how we can revolutionize, for example, the construction industry. So what we can see is everyone, pretty much every company, 43% year-on-year investment in AI. Just going back to challenges again, this is where we see quite a significant gap. The aspiration's there, the investment in technologies is there, but many executives do recognize that to integrate AI effectively into their broader business strategies is a challenge. Many of them have that build and run mentality still. So, now I've invested, have the technology on the ground, it's good to go. So that really leaves much or smaller room to just explore the potential of these technologies. And they're looking for immediate returns as well, which I know we're going to get into the financials later, but the immediate returns don't mean the project ends today and now we've made our money back and then some. So I think companies in the Middle East, while they're embracing these technologies, there's still a lot of the foundational elements that maybe need to be looked at in more detail.
That struck me, that even in what we consider is perceived as a traditional industry like construction, they are also thinking AI. That is something that is quite striking. Now, moving forward, so from the geographical perspective of around the world and more specifically in the Middle East, I wanted to understand if certain functions in corporations are more suited for GenAI. Is it rather the IT guys who are more into the piloting projects in AI, or do we expect that the accounting department is moving forward? I would like to know if you have some examples and in order to explain me how and why there is some difference between the industries or functions.
You're on mute, Florian.
That happened.
It always happens.
It was such a good start, sorry. So to answer your question, and not to answer your question, in fact, all industries and all functions are eligible for generative AI, because what you need to understand is there is 3 strategic missions to generative AI. The first one is the empowerment of employees. So what do we mean by that? We mean by that giving access to the employees to a tool like ChatGPT, for example, but that comply with corporate rules. Typically, if a company gives access to ChatGPT, but people like in Twitter are not able to put any information in ChatGPT that is not public, how you are not able to use it. And people are not able to just on the day-to-day job have efficiency gains or quality gains, answering email, translation, making analysis, and so on and so forth. Just with a small, easy tool like a ChatGPT, people can already have a lot of gains on their day-to-day job. So that's one part. So how do you enable the empowerment of your employees? The second question is more on the side of you have processes in your company. Which are the processes that could be improved and streamlined using GenAI? You were talking, it's a funny story. You were talking about accounting. We have a client that is a professional service, and we talk about audit, accounting, and tax. In fact, if you look at the accounting function, more than 50% of the time of the accountant is linked to the capture of information, meaning the document they receive and all these information. It's more than 50% of the time. I mean, all that can be automated because GenAI can read the document, know that it's an invoice. You can index and classify the invoice, and then you can even make a connection to your accounting system and transfer the information directly on the client file on his P&L or general ledger. So you can remove more than 50% of the duty of an accountant using GenAI, which is a good example because nobody will expect that. So that's really the process reengineering part, and most of the project we're doing today is linked to that. So it's really processes that are highly inefficient because it's impossible to handle these processes with IT or really difficult. Getting back to the accountant, OCR project cost a lot and are not really reliable. And GenAI is much more reliable for that. So if you look at your pain point as a company, you will find hundreds of them. The only question is which one are eligible for using GenAI. The third strategic mission is more about reinventing. So what's new can you create using GenAI? It can be in terms of customer care. It can be in terms of services. It can be in terms of product. I mean, how can GenAI also expand your reach and reinvent a certain number of things you're doing in your business model? So if you have a look at these three dimensions, it can be applied to any company. So no discrepancies. But at the end of the day, of course, there is some businesses or some function that are more eligible than others. And we get back to the white collars. We get back to the unstructured data. Typically, the investment function you will have within a bank, it's something that can be really improved using GenAI because the job of an analyst is just reading document and just making recommendation, right? I don't say you need to remove the analyst, but part of his job or the reach of his job can be really changed or improved using GenAI. What is interesting is how do you measure the impact then? Which impact can be expected from GenAI depending on different industries, which is a link back to the question of industries. And the industries where you will have a highest impact on the profit margin is, of course, softwares, because the coding can be really much faster using tools like GenAI. But you will have also luxury. With a 15% increase in profit margin, typically in terms of forecast, because it's more than in hyper-personalization, new product development, where you can also increase your margin and increase the reach. You will have hospitality, legal services, professional services, where you can expect an impact on 10%. So that's linked mostly to the redesign. But on the other side, if we talk about customer satisfaction, it's also another metric where you can have an impact using GenAI. We can talk about call centers where you can have support for agents. We can talk about employee satisfaction, giving them the empowerment. They will develop new skills. They will be more efficient. You will be able to remove non-valuable tasks. So there is many dimensions where you might have impact, and then for most of these, it's worth for most of the industries.
Florian, there is one part regarding the level of empowerment that companies give to their employees, like the use of certain tools using some private information. Is there a way to go around that? Because that's the typical question, and especially you mentioned it in Switzerland, where there is a little bit of a hardcore privacy country. It is very important. Is there a way around to start that employees use AI without sharing that information, without having the fear of putting that information in the big world?
Many big companies have done that on their own. The solution is having a cloud, typically an Azure cloud. I'm not paid by Microsoft, but we work a lot with them. And you have an Azure cloud that is yours, secured. And from Azure, you can access to OpenAI. And there is no sharing of information with OpenAI. You have all the guarantees from Microsoft that all this information will stay in your own environment. And it's typically a solution we have and we implement for our smaller clients if they don't want to do it by their own. And it's something that is really, people can put all the information. I mean, it's like storing any information on the cloud. And the connection with OpenAI, the OpenAI agent is run directly on Azure. So it's not a connection with OpenAI in California. So that's a secure solution, and that can be easily implemented either with a tool like we have or other tool that exist on the market, or developed by the company itself if they have the capabilities to develop such a tool internally. But it's based on Azure. That's the basics.
Okay.
Or AWS or Google.
So I want to move from the conservative European countries and go to the more enthusiastic countries in the Middle East. Zuleka, what can you tell us about this part of the industries and functions that are more suited for GenAI?
Look, I mean, to echo what Florian said, I think agree that every industry has a potential to be exploited by AI. Totally agree that it's the more traditional, legacy-filled, bureaucratic, process-driven industries or functions that would probably benefit the most. And that's why the ones that come to mind are around construction and engineering, but also healthcare as well. And that aspirational element, again, that you mentioned just now, when organizations here are building cities like Neom, for example, and to put that in context, we're looking at a city that's 33 times the size of New York. Those traditional challenges that you have in construction, where you're managing all these different people, all these different variables, and almost always, in fact, probably always, it leads to delays and cost overruns. And when you're developing a city the size of Neom, for example, or any of the other regional developments, you're magnifying those problems 100-fold. So completely agree that, you know, GenAI can bridge so many different gaps. It's not just about bridging the gap with process. They can generate design options, some of that creativity element that we talked about, but to also not just come up with designs, make it fit for site. Look at, you know, optimizing the project management and the site logistics so that the people are in the right place with the right materials. And one of the more creative parts that I'm seeing, many of these organizations have in-house innovation labs as well, but what they're doing is using GenAI to come up with sustainable materials. They're coming up with completely new. This is a reinvent feature that Florian mentioned as well. So we're already seeing these elements across the region. So they're definitely moving away from the traditional, the landscaping has sensors to measure air quality and soil quality, and it waters automatically, to now going and looking at how people are using the landscapes areas and create these super cool personalized user journeys. That's the direction the technology is going in. So aspirationally, again, these organizations are probably going beyond the empower and the redesign elements that Florian talked about, straight to the reinvent pillar. But again, to really leverage, I agree with Florian, you need to have the empower and the reinvent, the redesign piece in place to make the third piece successful.
Now, I want to get back to these usual conversations in bars, coffee places, and so on, where people have different ideas about if it is easy or not to adopt AI in corporations. So people are mentioning, yeah, it costs a bomb, it is difficult. My people are not ready in terms of capabilities. They need to learn. We need to embark in a full movement where people have to be upskilled. Processes are not put in place. Technology that needs to be put in place is also difficult. And I want to understand the realities of these hurdles that people perceives in implementing on adopting AI. And yeah, want to have your opinion about that.
From a cultural, personal, or human perspective, when we all saw that ChatGPT, I think in 2 months it got 100 million users and the interface is as simple as WhatsApp, we were all like, wow, it's, everyone's embracing it. But actually, I was looking back at statistics to see how has that adoption continued and whether people are still finding it easy to use platforms like ChatGPT and Gemini. And the stats say it's only 7% recurring users in the US and 2% in the UK. And I wonder if that's, of course, this is a public domain technology, but I wonder how much of it is people have given up on it because it's not reliable, it's error prone. We've talked about concepts of hallucinations and laziness. And if people feel like that technology, they've tried it, tested it, it hasn't worked very well, maybe when that same technology is embedded organizationally, the same sentiment will follow through. And I know Florian was mentioning that, you can have in-house AI technologies, but where organizations don't have their own bespoke platforms that are very distinct from the public platforms like ChatGPT, there is still a further trust issue. I'm not sure if you guys remember the Samsung example where the engineers pasted proprietary code into ChatGPT. Now it's forever embedded in ChatGPT. So if organizations, on the other hand, do not give their employees the tools and the mechanisms to embrace AI, the 7% and the 2% will continue using it on the sly. So for organizations to really benefit from or to integrate AI so that it's fully adopted, they really have to look at the human side, build back the trust factor, I would say. I mean, from a human side, look, you and I have always talked about change management. It's the same issue. When it comes to technology, it's probably exacerbated because people feel like their jobs are going to be made redundant and they're going to be superfluous. They're not necessarily skilled to think differently, so to ask the right questions. So the training and capability needs to be there, but also for adoption, you also need the process and the systems and the structure and the mechanisms to be there as well. So we're still away from that, but I think some companies are embracing it better than others.
I was a little bit shocked by the numbers. So after this moment of curiosity where everybody went and try, there was the moment of reality. The first friction is I give ChatGPT a prompt and I get an answer that somebody else could have done it even better.
Yeah.
And you're right. The human aspect of thinking differently in order to have the right prompt and the real value behind AI has made that the numbers have been so low because you don't stay if you don't get what you expected. I was impressed. Now, we have discussed about the operational side, the human side, and the operational side of the for the adoption. But what about in terms of the money, in terms of the infrastructure? Maybe Florian, you can tell me a little bit more about that side.
With pleasure. But perhaps I would like to jump back on what Zuleka said. There is a great story from Deloitte that has been done last year about the efficiency gain that employee had using ChatGPT. And the result was that people using ChatGPT on a day-to-day basis for their own job, the productivity gain was not given back to the company. Meaning, so if they can save half a day over the week, thanks to ChatGPT, on the Friday afternoon, what they will do is just go golf or biking or whatever. So they are not giving back first that productivity gain to the company, and they are not talking internally saying, oh, you know, I have done that with ChatGPT and it works super fine. So that's why it's really important to have a corporate approach, as Zuleka said, to using this tool, so that the productivity gain gets back to the company and not only to the employees. To answer your question, there is different way to answer it. The first one is it requires the cloud. I mean, there is few companies that have the financial capability to implement generative AI on-premise, because it costs a lot in terms of infrastructure. It's really difficult to get the right infrastructure. We talk about NVIDIA cards, for example. And it doesn't really make sense because in terms of security, there is enough security measure you can put on the cloud, but I know some banks that are still trying. But the first thing people need to know is if we want to do it, we need to go on the cloud. That's the first condition for implementing any GenAI project for a company. In terms of cost, it's not a problem because the cost of the cloud is something not huge, right? You have the cost of the token. I mean, it's complex in terms of pricing, but it's not that will kill your IT budget for sure. The second element is linked in terms of cost to the development. So if your references are IT projects or AI project, traditional AI project, usually you talk about millions, depending on the size of the project, because it takes time, it takes engineers, and the project will run over 6 months to a year and a half, depending on the subject. I had implemented in my last company a huge AI project. We're talking about more than 1 million Swiss francs for making the implementation. So it's really big numbers. When we talk about GenAI, it's not these big numbers because the intelligence is available directly on the cloud. So the barrier is more doing the proof of concept, which is really algorithmic, is not really expensive. We can talk about perhaps 100,000 Swiss francs. The cost might come afterwards in the integration within the company. If you need to integrate with API and so on and so forth, it might cost double that. But we are not talking about implementing SAP within your company. It's not the same size in terms of numbers, and the return of investment is absolutely not the same. The last 2 projects we have implemented, we were talking about typically one use case was about indexing all the email and all the document the company received for compliance reason. It was in financial services. All what was linked to the client need to be filed and indexed. It was around 20% of the time of their employees, front office employees, to manage that and to make the indexation of these documents and emails. We automated everything. So it's a gain of 20% of the time on the number of the employee of the company that the front office was around 100 people. Return on investment was a month, right? So the question of the cost versus the value, if you choose the right use cases, it's not a question at all, because you're really able to solve big pain points or super inefficient processes that are in place today because no solution were existing before. Perhaps one last point that is, for me, really important, which is a long discussion I always have with my client, is about governance. Today, there is no GenAI responsible in the company, right? Because GenAI was not existing. So then the company asked, should we give the project or the responsibility to IT because somehow it's IT? Or should we give that to the CEO? Or should we give that to the head of marketing or the chief of staff? And or the chief of innovation, typically. And it's really a good question, because people need to think that we talk about business, okay? It's not a question of IT. The value of GenAI is on the side of business. IT, or inside or outside the company, will realize the value. But the real question is on the side of the business. So the person needs to be on the side of the business. Typically, many clients, it's more on the side of strategy, or with chief of staff teams, or a head of digital, if they have a head of digital. But it's really a big question, because if you need to start with the governance so that you make sure that you will be able to deliver the value, and the value will be delivered to the business and to the client. And people need really to think about that, because if not, you will be able to spend a lot of money with really a low return on investment.
I love the analogy that you made with the implementation of SAP, because typically when there was the time in the beginning of the 2000s, all these companies investing heavily into SAP, millions of dollars, with a lot of consultants, the return on investment could be maybe 10 years, 5 years, because the implementations to bring all these beautiful German guys to the company, it was costly. And here, in fact, if I understood correctly, the value is you get it in a shorter term. Like you mentioned, 1 month, it could be 2 months, but whatever it costs, you can have the return because you get real value. It's not just about reformatting processes or being more compliant. It's right away something that could have been done by a lot of people that now is automatized, and a lot of people are used into more human skills in the organization.
Yeah, exactly. If you choose the right use case, of course. But that's how it happens when you have the right one. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, let's imagine this beautiful world. Magically, we need to be in front of one of the top companies of CEOs in the Middle East or here in Europe, and we need to give them a tip or an approach in order to start implementing GenAI. What would be this advice that you will give him from face to face?
Somewhat getting back to what I said before, the start should be an experimental approach, okay? Because it's not a question of making 150 slides about the strategy. Company need to try, okay? So they need to try, they need to upgrade some engineers internally. They need to find the low-hanging fruits where they can test and see how they are able to bring the value. Making POCs, but really the philosophy is to say, okay, we don't know if we're going to have a good result, but let's try, okay? Let's experiment. So that really will be the first phase for most of the companies, saying, okay, we need to experiment so that we understand better. It's a question of maturity. Getting back to what Zuleka said also, it requires some trainings. So it's really starting a journey. You know, the journey will be long because it won't stop tomorrow. It's not a hype, but it's really a question of taking all the company from point A to point A1, because you're going to have many A's afterwards before you go to B, right? And that's the experimentation approach. And within that experimentation approach, the empowerment phase is really important because it gets back to the change management. People need to be convinced that the technology brings value to them. So you need to teach them, you need to give them the tools so that they can also experiment and see the limits. I mean, we are not saying that the technology is magic. There is limit in the technology, of course, but people will be able to use it and see, okay, I can do my job faster, or if I have an email, he can write the email for me or answer the email for me much better than I would have done, right? But especially much faster too. But that's really the part of having the people on board, understanding the technology, using the technology, and from there, they also will be able to understand, to identify the use case and say, okay, I'm doing that directly on ChatGPT. But what if we implement it from a corporate standpoint on that process? That will be really a great opportunity to improve the process in terms of speed and added value for the company. And you have the efficiency gain and quality gain doing empowerment first. And you also have the change management that goes with, because they will be much more supportive afterwards when you try to change and redesign the thing. To be honest, when we have discussion with the client, we always have the two subjects on the table, meaning empowering and redesigning. So option sometimes is we start with empowering, like perhaps 30% of the client. 30% of the client will say, okay, no, we have a use case, so we know what we want to do, and we think we have the right use cases. And 40% of the client do both. They take both directions, saying, okay, let's try to find the right use cases, so we come with proof that we can add value. Usually it's use cases that are oriented toward a lot of employees and not just one function or one division, but also make the empowerment in parallel so that we can get the gains from both directions.
I got the feeling that this time the change management is a little bit more different than the usual implementation of Salesforce or SAP. It needs less of teaching, but more of learning by doing. And it's kind of a change in culture, right, Zuleka? Because we have been facing this type of changes where it is not about giving hours and hours of training to the full organization. It's more about changing the mindset in order that they start just using it and learning through the use of that technology. Is that right?
Yeah,
completely. Sorry, Florian, go.
It's also linked to curiosity, because when you're doing all what you said on ChatGPT 4, ChatGPT 5 in terms of technology is going to come end of this year, beginning of next year, right? And the capabilities will be much higher. So some limits you might find today will be gone next year. So it's really that curiosity and the testing and the experimentation that should be given in terms of culture for the company adopting the empowerment.
Indeed.
Now, I would just add to that, again, training employees, providing them with the capabilities, giving them the space to experiment and innovate is brilliant. But if the ecosystem doesn't align with that, then there's a problem. And we've seen it time and time again in the organizations that we work with. So if we're going to target the low-hanging fruit and the experimentation, we really need to move away from those centralized decision-making, overly bureaucratic, super process-driven, that just all things that are designed to stifle innovation. Doesn't mean we don't have any of that. It means you have robust governance, but then that employees do have the space to innovate. They have the tools that they need to be able to innovate, and great tools, not ones that they get, fed up with because they can't place their trust in them. So I think both go hand in hand. We can't do one without the other, as we've always said through every change management program that we've ever run. you can't have one without the other. But at the same time, all of these issues are compounded when it comes to AI, because this is technology that isn't commonplace yet. It will be, but up until that point, there's still a significant learning curve.
We are reaching the end of this conversation, and if the some of the people are going to be wanted to know more about the technology, about how to implement it, to get some tips to move forward, how can they reach you out? Is there any specific way that you prefer to be reached, Zuleka?
I'm super active on LinkedIn most of the time, so happy to share my my profile link in the chat here for people to contact me through that.
Okay. What about you, Florian?
LinkedIn is fine for me also, and email address is florian@prometheus.com, so you can decide which one is the most convenient for you.
I will make sure that all these links are put below this video. Thank you very much for your time. It is wonderful that we got the opportunity to share a little bit of the discussions that we have got already separately in other times. It was really a nice, good discussion that we have been progressing little by little. Thank you very much, Zuleka and Florian.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.